Hello, I hope everybody's having a great time at Ignite. So far, so good? Yeah? You guys getting your counters in on your steps taken per day, getting from the expo booth to west, north? Didn't know the convention center was this big. We're going to be talking today about Nestlé and their transformation to Office 365 from silos to collaboration. Kind of the key objectives is to share with you today is the transforming of Nestlé's business through Microsoft 365 and how FastTrack played a role in assisting that evolution, and then how 365 is enabling Nestlé to take its next steps. So let me just quickly introduce myself. My name is Thomas Wigger. I'm a principal PM manager in FastTrack, and we also have Nestlé here, as I mentioned, for the chat. And to get started, we have Cliff. Tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe kind of what the experience was at a really high level, and what kind of the ahas or anything kind of fun that happened through this transformation.
Sure, thanks Thomas. So good afternoon everyone, my name's Clifford Kennedy. I'm part of Nestlé's architecture, strategy and innovation team. So I've been with Nestlé for almost 21 years now, including a role that was based here for some time out in California. Today, however, I sit in Sydney, back in Australia, and my team, however, sits in Switzerland, so I do go backwards and forwards quite a lot. For us, we got started on the Office 365 journey back in 2013. That was when my team and I kicked it off. And for us, all we could see was this daunting challenge of needing to move around 300,000 mailboxes into the cloud, and kind of scratching our head as to how we do that, because when you're sort of looking at the technical aspects, it all seems kind of rather straightforward. But we had on our side around 120 terabytes worth of data, and we knew that we had to coordinate this effort across around somewhere in the order of 1,600 sites, made up of 460 factories, often running 24/7. So there's some of the kind of logistics that we had to kind of manage. And as I say, we got started on that journey in 2013, but we really only started moving mailboxes somewhere around 2015, and that's sort of when we got underway.
Okay. And Cedric?
Hi, my name is Cedric Jan-Hoots. I have apparently the longest title in history. So I am Employee Digital Workplace Engagement Lead. I'm really impressed you put that on one line. So on my side, I'm based in Switzerland, so where we have the headquarters of the company. This is where we're centrally deploying Office 365. My role in the organization is really around driving adoption and productivity improvement through the digital workplace. Major part of digital workplace is Office 365. So we're focusing really on the communication aspect, the change management, the community management, and the training and learning. So it's our key focus, and we've been involved in the Office 365 deployment. Looking at how we could get people to use all of those solutions and use them in the right way that they really benefit from them.
Okay. And on stage here we also have my colleague Juha. Juha, can you introduce yourself and explain how FastTrack became involved with Nestlé, and then take it how that engagement process actually worked?
Absolutely, Thomas, thanks. So yes, good afternoon everybody. My name is Juha Ikonen, and if Cedric has the longest title, then my title is probably the most confusing, if you will. So I'm a program manager within the FastTrack team, but I'm performing a role of FastTrack architect. So I hope that is clear. So Nestlé started the journey to the cloud already in 2013, but of course the FastTrack team was ever established in 2014. So we were a little bit late in that game, but as soon as we were established, the account team basically introduced us to Nestlé, and we started to look at the FastTrack benefit available at that time and how does it work for Nestlé. And one of the key things that we of course started to think about and plan is the mailbox migration. So that's how we got started. The Microsoft account team for Nestlé introduced us to Nestlé, who was already.
And how was that also engagement? Was there other parts of Microsoft involved in that engagement?
Absolutely. So the FastTrack wasn't the only team from Microsoft working with Nestlé. There's also Microsoft Consulting Services who were involved and still are. We're still doing a lot of adoption activities together. So it was actually one Microsoft team combining Microsoft Consulting Services and the FastTrack team working to help Nestlé move to the cloud.
Okay. And now part of that is that FastTrack is part of the purchase of the license. So Nestlé had the right to using FastTrack for their service. Cliff, can you tell us about what the environment looked like before and the Exchange migrations and your kind of where you started? I think you kind of mentioned when we were catching up last night, this started on at an earlier point.
It certainly did. So Nestlé has always looked at opportunities to rationalize and optimize their environment. And so prior to moving to Office 365, we'd already consolidated all of our Exchange infrastructure into 3 major data centers around the globe. So they were the remaining 3 footprints of Exchange that we had. So when you sort of think about that, then you've already optimized your staff, you've optimized a lot of your processes around patch management, and all these sort of things that were often considered those sort of nice ways to save by moving to Office 365. So we were already at that point. But of course, it was quite stagnant. We're sitting at sort of the 2010 product set, and here we were in 2013. Our users are looking for a little bit more, and it sort of went beyond that as well. I mean, we had users starting to explore tools outside of Nestlé as well. They're looking to sort of go it alone. IT's too slow. We're going to start choosing our own product sets. And so, we had that shadow IT aspect come into our organization, much like I'm sure some of you as well in the room would have. And so, we had this almost point of conflict. IT's kind of doing the right thing. We're trying to look at cost-saving measures. We're trying to optimize our environment, but it's not actually responding to what our users were looking for. And so they're going it alone. So at that point, we'd already started to paint the vision for what we had for our employee digital workplace. And for us, Office 365 was a component of that transformation that we're looking to achieve. And so when we sort of talk about launching that in 2013, we then wanted to support it with an organization that was ready to support the business. Because for us, Office 365 wasn't just an IT adventure or venture. It was about looking at new ways for our employees to work. We're looking at new avenues to engage with our employees. It's important not to just throw a tool at the employee. We want them to actually get something out of it as well. Is it going to make their life better? Is it actually going to save them time throughout their day? And IT are not the best people to kind of have that conversation. And so we established a team that already has been alluded to with Cedric's introduction. The employee digital workplace team was formed and sitting under our HR organization to kind of help us on that journey. And so then when we did kick it off properly, more so in 2014, we sort of had that support by IT and the EDWP team, as we abbreviate to, came together to try and help us on that journey.
So as Juha mentioned, you engaged FastTrack immediately. It's kind of good timing. It was kind of perfect time that FastTrack was launched, right, when you were making that step. So there were some challenges, and the mail migration was really what you were ready to do. There were some challenges that I know that came up. How did you manage looking at those? How do you gain advantage on those challenges and create the best path forward? Can you talk more about that? I mean, there was the transformations, those pieces.
Yeah. So when we first met with FastTrack, and I mean, we've talked about the fact that it only sort of really established itself in 2014, and that was really okay for us because we were sort of challenged in other areas of the program, which we might touch on later. But in terms of this area, when we sat with FastTrack, they wanted us to kind of look at, providing 21-day lead time of how to migrate, of the group of users you want to migrate. They really didn't understand that, we're in a business that's operating, around the clock, operating in all of these countries around the world. We couldn't be providing, 21-day lead time on moving mailboxes. And so that was the first challenge we had. The other challenge that we had was just around, the ability to get the data that we needed to get there. 300,000 mailboxes, 120 terabytes. It's an enormous amount of data that we needed to move. And so there was a lot of back and forth just around, how do you manage getting all that data in? There were some throttling issues that we came up against. There were some infrastructure issues, even on our side. I mean, you've got all this data sitting in a data center that has like 3 or 4 layers of security, firewalls, different technologies that you've got to, punch through to get out to the internet. And so, there was a lot of challenges that we had to work through. But, having said all that, the real key with working with FastTrack is you've got that immediate engagement with engineering as well. You get to tunnel back into the Microsoft organization to help solve some of these problems. It's kind of that key. If you're sort of trying to do it on your own, you're almost like a fool because you've got all of this great, technology and support through Microsoft with FastTrack. That's kind of the channel that you want to try and lean up against to make it possible for your organization to make that shift. Yeah. And that's how we sort of saw it.
And then on that scheduling part, I think that's where services services came in and helped build kind of a scheduling tool, correct? Tell me, because part of that challenge was, if I remember correctly, was you had all these different branches of the business.
Yeah.
They had different objectives, timelines. Maybe they were doing close of books, or they were launching a product or something like that, right?
That's exactly right. And so, I alluded to the fact that we had to provide this lead time. And then, of course, we've got to try and move all of these users across all of these markets. And we're not in a position to actually know what each of our individual users are doing day by day. Are they traveling? Are they going to be out of office? Is it just not possible for them to move today? And so MCS were engaged to build a front end to this migration. What we did was we worked with them, we built a tool actually in SharePoint and Line in the end, and it actually sucked our metadata out of our Active Directory. So it exposed all of the user attributes, it exposed reporting lines, it even allowed us to ring fence communities that would actually then form countries that we then could delegate the migration activity. So you were able to say, okay, the US, you go for it. Here's how many users you're allowed to migrate a day. You get started, and then you go to the UK, okay, here's how many users you're allowed to do a day, and you could actually set them on that course. And it just meant that, we're able to get it happening in parallel. It wasn't kind of like one person sitting at the top trying to work out, okay, who do I move now, or who do I move next?
It was a real proactive approach too, that you weren't
was.
working as an afterthought, let's migrate these data. Now, you mentioned something a little bit about there was some challenge with the layers of access, conditional access. What happened there?
Yeah, so I think I've thrown a few dates around already. I kind of talked about we started in 2013, and then I said I only migrated in 2015, so there's a fair bit of time lost there. And so there was this period of around 15 months where we were essentially blocked. We couldn't move any data. And what we do at Nestlé as part of any project or solution that we undertake, we've got to put it through an internal risk assessment. We need to understand, what, if any, risks exist by us going down that path. And it's not about that every risk would block us, it's just you've got to understand what's in play. But there were a number of risks that we had that talked about data leakage. And those data leakage issues we just couldn't sign off on. Now, just to be clear, we're not talking about data leakage within the service. The way the Office 365 service is built, managed, and architected in Microsoft data centers is completely fine. We've got no problem with that. The data leakage I'm referring to is a legitimate authentication that could take place on an unmanaged device that would allow data to come out of the service, and you actually had no controls or no visibility to that device. And that's where we felt that we just couldn't sign off on that. And so we then had to partner with the Intune team, actually was the key team that we worked with, to try and develop solutions that helped solve us there. And so there was two major developments that then followed. Some of you may have actually heard of these. One is the mobile application management without enrollment, and the other one was conditional access, and the ability for us to actually put a control in place that would actually say, okay, depending on the device state, you would then allow it into the service and then would make decisions as to how they could consume the data. Were they allowed to use Outlook, the rich client, and download the mailbox, or were they being forced to use a browser experience?
And then how did that look for you from a FastTrack perspective?
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting example, this conditional access. I don't know how many of you actually attended the previous session in this room with Jeff Nicol. Show of hands. Okay, one of the things that Jeff basically pointed out that there was the need for the FastTrack was to basically shorten the distance between customers and engineering. Now, working with through the FastTrack and the Intune team, we were able to basically shorten the distance between Nestlé and then the Intune team, so that we were able to help the Intune team to prioritize this particular feature called conditional access, because it was clear business case for Nestlé and for Microsoft to get this blocker moved away, and so they were able to basically provide the solution not immediately but over time, which helped them unblock that situation and continue with the migration.
So it shortened the timeline. It was a collaborative effort, and even though it was a challenge, that's not necessarily a bad thing. You find out nuances, and as you mentioned, as you unpack some of these pieces, you got caught up. Found some things that we need to work on both sides. Let's continue the discussion on the strategy for your mail migrations. You mentioned there was a huge amount of effort. We talked about the amount of mailboxes. What was the target to get that done, and how did you guys end up reaching that goal?
So we'd set ourselves a target that we needed to be done by April of 2016, I think was the final end date. And the fact that we had to go away and build this tool kind of shortened that timeline down considerably. I think the tool finally went live around August, September of 2015. So we were sort of up against the wall now. We had like 6 to 7 months to complete this effort. And when we got out of the gate, when we just got started, we were only able to push like 200 mailboxes, I think, in the first night, which was just insane. I mean, you sort of do the math, it was going to take us like 10 years or something. And so we knew immediately we had to try and dig into what was the issues that were holding us back. And I alluded to a few of those earlier around those network aspects. But then there was this trouble that we're seeing on the throttling side. And, you know, what I'm referring to there is within the Office 365 fabric, Microsoft obviously needs to continue to deliver service out to existing customers while still accepting data coming in from new customers. And there was this real challenge around, you know, how do we ensure that, or how do they ensure they don't disrupt their service? And so we needed to work through that. I think it took us about 6 weeks to kind of get to a really nice, what's often referred to as the velocity, the number of mailboxes that you can move. And we got to a point of around 10 to 12,000 on average per week. And we got to a ceiling of about 21,000 mailboxes in a single week, which, you know, got us there. I think we finished the last major move, I think on about the 10th of April or something of 2016. So I think we were really happy with that. There was a lot of mop-up that went post, but we managed to achieve at the timeline that we're looking for.
Yeah, and so at that point, it's, you know, when you reach that peak or in the average flow velocity, the 10 to 12,000 mailboxes a week, that's from all the different market segments of Nestlé. How did that look for the FastTrack team, for going through that whole process of working, getting the scheduling, understanding the governance that we had, we thought about as we went through that process?
Yeah, I mean, when you think about a company which works in a single location, it's fairly small number of users, the scheduling of the mailbox migrations is fairly straightforward. You just basically pick the people and say, okay, these mailboxes move in this migration window, etc. You take that same scenario to the size and enormity of Nestlé, and you think about, okay, how many layers of management there are, who can make the final decision, etc. So that was a major challenge for Nestlé. Of course, what we did as the FastTrack Center, the interface between our customers and then the FastTrack Center migration team was a spreadsheet. Now, what we needed to understand is that what's the best way for Nestlé to basically come up with that spreadsheet on a regular basis that says, okay, next migration window, next migration window, next migration window. So we basically worked with the MCS team then to help Nestlé come up with this solution in place. And that was also a great learning for us. It was said initially that it was like 21 days before the migration window when we needed to get the final list of the users. We learned quickly enough that that doesn't work in every single scenario. So we made it a little bit more flexible. And I guess what you can expect today is that the initial information needs to come in fairly early, but you will have an ability to basically pull mailboxes away from that migration window much closer to the actual migration time. And that was one of the developments that we sort of introduced as part of the Nestlé experience.
Great.
And just on that point, I mean, it was rather quickly too. I mean, once we sort of hit those first few migrations where we had to provide 21 days in advance, and we then had to have those conversations saying, look, this is just not working, those sorts of changes were actually made on the fly. It wasn't like we had to endure that for the whole 6 months. So, you know, there's a really good dialogue that was going backwards and forwards with FastTrack. I mean, it was a new service at that time. They were still learning. We were still learning about what we needed to do as well. So, I mean, it was a good collaboration between the two organizations.
Yeah, and I think there's also that you had a lot of preparation ready to go, right? And so it made that conversation easier. You'd done a lot of the preparation ahead of time, so it's made it flexible. But if you look back at this, in the end, the migrations, from what I understand, were relatively unnoticed by the end users. Is that right?
Yeah, for a large percentage of users, I believe it was a rather smooth occasion. We had some area around mobile, which I'll touch on later, but I think for the most part, I think the users move without issue. One of the things, though, I'll share is that internally we're quite conflicted about, do we actually alert the user to the mailbox move? Any of you that are in the room that have Exchange admins, I'm sure you move a mailbox, you're leveling your servers, you can do that really without alerting the user. And so we as IT, were kind of saying to ourselves, well, we're moving a mailbox, the user will get the normal prompt, maybe they can just restart Outlook, it'll all be good. But then, of course, my friend here from representing our users would often chime in and suggest, but it's important that the user is aware of what we're doing. It may go fine, there may not be any issue. And so in the end, we did end up go ahead and advise them. Messages would go out telling them, hey, you're part of the next wave of users. But we took that opportunity as well to sort of make the announcement about Office 365. So it wasn't an altogether loss of opportunity. Yeah. You were able to use you brought a story to it as well.
Yeah. Is there anything, if you would, from an architecture standpoint, if you were going to do this again, would you take any back or do something different? Maybe, would you go to market with newer workloads sooner, or?
I think we were very conservative, okay. and I'm looking towards my colleagues in the audience that, obviously I push a lot of work to, so I do make their time a bit tough. But at the same time, I think we're often too conservative as an organization with change. And there's always this fear of being too disruptive. So I think we could have done a little bit more. We didn't wait to the end of our Exchange migration, though, to introduce a second workload.
Okay.
We kicked off SharePoint right on the back of kicking off Exchange. And so there was an opportunity for us to introduce SharePoint very shortly after.
Okay. Well, Cedric, you know, we talked a little bit, he alluded to the fact that the adoption wasn't necessarily a massive effort, but you guys did choose to make some communication to the end users. Since there wasn't an adoption effort really there, it seemed to be, you know, it went seamless from an experience standpoint for the end users. How did you look at that when you started looking at these other workloads to the digital workplace?
Yeah, as Cliff mentioned, it was the mailbox migration was kind of easy for us in terms of communication. So we just drafted all the emails that had to be sent out, get them translated, give them to them, and they said that's what it is. People, they go home on a Friday afternoon or Friday evening, they come on Monday, their mailbox migrated, nothing's different, all good, right? And then it was, okay, now we have all of these solutions that are available, the OneDrive, the SharePoint, and many others. And we need to start communicating about them. Mm-hmm. And we had a lot of discussions about as to when was the right time to communicate about them. We were still running, I think, Office 2010, no integration at the time with OneDrive, and well, you guys were pushing us to say, well, you need to communicate. And we said, well, the experience is not there yet, so we'll wait. And if people go onto Office 365 and they start discover OneDrive, that's fine. It's there, it's available, but we waited for the right moment to start communicating. And that was fairly quickly, actually, after the migration. And then we started a communication campaign where we introduced SharePoint and OneDrive. We've had SharePoint for a while, and so there was a very natural way of just using the new SharePoint. But OneDrive was really a novelty. And interestingly, a lot of people had that need to have that personal file share where they can actually share to their colleagues or even to people outside of the company. So we had a strong communication to introduce those two solutions. But at the same time, talk about the benefits that are coming from the Office Online applications. So there was something new. There was the co-editing, and how more productive you can get by enabling several people to edit a document at the same time. And then there was the possibility to have all of that on your mobile. And there's such a huge number of people in a company having mobile devices. And now they can do more than just email. They can review documents. They can look quickly at swipe through a PowerPoint presentation while they're on the train to get ready for their meeting. So we really pushed for this because it was really the right time, and you need to bring that awareness to people that these things are there and what they can do for them. It was really about driving what is it that you can get and how you're going to get more productive. We really pushed for that, and then we started to see takeoff of usage of OneDrive, SharePoint. And the Office apps was it was like the icing on the cake. Yeah. It was that extra stuff, and well, some people say, well, I like my document to open in Word, not in Word Online, and because that's a change. And then when you look at the benefits and say, well, there's other stuff you can do, and it opens faster, and if it's a big document, you'll get it faster. And they're like, oh yeah. And so we took them through that change management and bringing those solutions. But really important, we had the feeling after our first communication campaign that we had hit everyone, and actually that's a continuous process. You need to go back and keep talking about it. And so we now have put in place a few channels of communications that we keep activating and keep reminding people that those solutions are out there.
Yeah, it's great to see that transformation from the Exchange migration, having that be seamless, really kind of helped kickstart and made the communications, made people more acceptable. Like they saw the change happening. It wasn't a bad experience. They saw that transformation. It kind of seems to have opened them up. And thanks for sharing that, how that adoption kind of cycle started there. Now, from a technical side, what did that mean? So you've already done the SharePoint enablement. Now you're into the OneDrive. What does that mean from an architecture side?
Yeah, so I mean, Cedric touched on it that, although I was very much for getting all of these services out there, make them available to everybody that we had in the organization, there was a lot of issues around the product set that we were running on the client side. we're running Office 2010. It didn't obviously allow that rich integration that came with obviously later versions of Office. You had a terrible OneDrive sync engine that was on their market at the time, the old OneDrive for Business sync engine that if any of you have had anything to do with, that was absolutely rubbish. So they were things that really prevented us being able to go wild with this stuff. But at the same time, we were pushing out the Office 2013 client. It was there to help us in some other areas as well. So we managed to get that out shortly after starting the Exchange migration. So that got that sorted. The OneDrive Sync client then obviously carried through into the next year. But what we did there is we just focused on saying, well, okay, you've got all of the web experience. And then on the back of that, we sort of said, look, we're going to give you the opportunity to use all of the services. But what we did was we classified things as either core or accessory. So what we said to the business is, okay, here's Exchange, here's SharePoint, here's the OneDrive web experience. We're going to make that core. We're going to give you support end to end. You got a problem, you log your ticket, we'll get you sorted. And then we had everything else just collectively grouped as accessories because we wanted to sort of give the opportunity for our users to start to discover, get that sort of, viral adoption going in different areas. And so we made it possible for them to have that, and then we'd support that on the back of more of a community support. Mm-hmm. We'd use our enterprise social networking tool to support them, or turn to your colleague or turn to your teammate and see what help you can get. And so that's sort of more of how we looked at it from an IT perspective.
I know, Cedric, for you, we want to agitate a little bit more on the OneDrive perspective. What did that adoption mean for you? I mean, you mentioned a little bit how people were using. How did you take the feedback loops from the end users, and do you adapt your adoption strategies as you worked with the users?
Yeah, we realized, when we started OneDrive, we thought OneDrive was a novelty, and it seemed easy enough. It's a space for your documents, and you can share with other people. That's it, and you create folders, right? And but eventually we realized that actually a lot of people still, like a year after, still didn't know that OneDrive existed, and worse, we're actually using third-party solutions, right? So we said we need to be sort of everywhere at the same time. So we decided to upgrade our communication strategy and do it in three channels. So we still have those big top-down communication that is coming at slow pace. Sort of every month we have a communication about one particular topic. That will be the OneDrive, or that will be the Skype for Business. And it's a little bit of information, little things that people need to know, how to best use, how to get the best quality of sound with Skype by using the proper app sets, how to maximize the sharing with external on OneDrive. And so we have that first one, slow, and to target it to all employees. And then we have that second one, which was about, so we need to be close to our users. And we don't have an organization of thousands of people that can just go and sit with every employee and start to tell them how this works. So we developed this program of champions, right? People sitting in the business, they will sit in marketing, they will sit in sales, they will sit in supply chain. They have an interest in technology, or they have an interest in productivity, and they will be the one that will be training and helping their team to move on to using those new solutions, but also changing their ways of working, right? Being mobile, working out loud, and that sort of thing. And so the top-down communication, the adoption network, and the last one was through our social network. And it was going about, there's some groups, there's a group that is supporting people on Office 365. There's a group, well, there'll be many, but there's a group of salespeople, and you think, well, these guys, we can send them a targeted communication specifically about how to get mobile, because they're always on the run. And then there'll be the community of HR, and we'll send them a different communication. And it's little things, very targeted, right? And these are 3 channels to try and reach, because again, you need to go and continuously re-inform people that those things are out there, and especially in an organization our size. And the importance as well of being local, as you deal with many different cultures, but also many different languages, and we operate in English. So our big thing, we translate in 12 languages, but there's a lot of of content. We can't just have every piece of content or every little help translated in language. So now, through our champions, through our social network, is getting talk to them in their language.
Yeah.
And that was.
So as you're sharing here, we're starting to allude to like the Exchange migrations, the SharePoint migrations, the OneDrive migrations, and I know there's some other things that have happened that have become enabled. Is for Cedric, for you, is that the digital transformation is really Office 365 helped start that, really kind of drive that digital transformation. Can you tell the audience how that enabled you, how Office 365 enabled you to make that transformation as far as the work styles of people?
Yeah, well, and it's still in progress.
Oh, absolutely.
And because that's a change, and that change is really, it's really personal. And people, you're trying to get people from a way of working that they've been doing for the past 5, 10, 20, 30 years, and you say now you need to shift, and you need to be more transparent. You need to work out loud. You need to create community. You need to connect. And so our change agents, the champions, they're driving those changes. They are informing about those new ways of working, the idea of being mobile. And it's really critical we get them, because there's also a lot of, you would hit like local regulations as to what you can do in a country and what you can't do. So bringing that change, and it's a huge effort, and you need those people inside. That would take 6 to 10 weeks for people to change their way of working. So we've been severely attacking the email and said email is not it's not the efficient way to collaborate. Try to use Yammer, and try to use Team now recently. And that change is a process that takes 6 to 10 weeks, because people tend to, as soon as there's a little hurdle on the way, a little thing that's not working, they go back, right? And you need to have your change agent there. And after those 6 to 8, 10 weeks sometimes, then that change becomes normal. And that becomes the way that they work. But it is really challenging, but we've seen really great benefits and as to how people connect. And we're really looking forward to, we're actually officially launching Team in a few weeks. We've had a lot of pilots so far, but this way of being so much more dynamic and so much more mobile. Interestingly, actually, as we arrive at Ignite, there's 10 of us here. We said, well, let's use a team to connect. Yeah. And we were sharing during all this. I mean, we all go to different sessions and sharing and taking pictures and then explaining what we had seen, the key takeaways. And that was a really great experience for that. So we're really excited to launch that to our users in the coming weeks.
Now, Cliff, transformation of the people, but there's also a transformation for the IT. What does that look like for you, this digital transformation in your teams?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's important to sort of go back to also the way Microsoft sells Office 365 to some of our CIOs. There's always this promise, move everything to the cloud, you can get rid of a few resources, and you won't have to patch your servers, you won't have to do all of this stuff. But where we came from, as I shared earlier, I mean, we had already done all this optimization. So you're down to 1.5 resource that looks after Exchange or something like that. So I mean, if you no longer have to worry about patching those servers, okay, so you've taken maybe a quarter of their workload away from it. Doesn't mean you actually get to clear that resource out of your environment. So I think it's important to sort of just be careful about some of those promises about reducing your head count. I think what we're started to see is how can you take that resource and open them to new ways of administering solutions. I mean, Office 365 opens up so much for an employee, but I think as technical people, there's so much for us to look at as well. New tool sets, new ways to administer. So the service has got a lot to offer in that space. In terms of our org ourselves, we haven't made any dramatical change to our organization in terms of operations at this stage. We are continuing to look at a few things that are happening. Some of those have been announcements we've heard this week, just the convergence of products, like if we sort of think about Teams and Skype for Business, that's also bringing together, you've got telephony aspects, you've got a network aspect, you've got a productivity aspect as well. How are we going to look at how we support that going forward? So we're really looking at that closely at the moment. Office 365 Groups is a workload or multiple of services coming together that we will launch at the end of this week more broadly as part of our core program. And obviously that brings in Yammer as now a core function. It brings in Teams as a core function. And we're now going to look at how we sort of support that, because traditionally we had all these classic workloads of Exchange and SharePoint, and you always back that with a set of administrators or operators to look after that. Now you're kind of bringing that story together, and you've got to say, okay, there's no point having just Exchange stand on their own and SharePoint stand on their own. When you've got a ticket coming in from an end user that's going to relate to the product being groups or being Yammer, you're going to be ensure you've got the right people connected to support them. I think this isolated support story won't work. So we've got to dig into that a little bit more, but I think it's something we don't want to just sort of pull the trigger and make something dramatic. We want to see what it looks like after sort of a number of months of operating, and just see where we have those rough edges around support to see where we need to focus and make those changes.
Now, was there any struggle or challenge with showing how that impact has been made, or? Not significantly at the moment. There's always there is some people that will often push back. Why are we going to the cloud? Yeah.
We're much better at managing it ourselves, and you get a lot of pushback from people like that. But I think for the most part, most people did get on board in the end, and so I think now we've sort of got so far down the road now. There's no turning back. Yeah. This is where we're going.
Now, I remember in our conversation you mentioned prior to this that we mentioned something about you created an index to show how you're to illustrate to your executives the impact you guys are making.
Yeah. So again, there's always this branding that goes with the product. Move to Office 365, be more collaborative. Improve productivity. And so then, of course, our executive community turns around and says, okay, so you've got all these users now using Exchange, you've got all these users using SharePoint Online. Show me how their productivity's been improved. What's that magical number? Are we saving them an hour of their day now that we're in Office 365? And so, we've really struggled with this. We've looked at Office 365, help us. We've spoken to the reporting, the usage reporting team, those responsible for the content pack, the Office 365 content pack. Can we get any magical data that's going to help us tell the story? And unfortunately, there's not been a magical number. And so I think it's probably important that I let Cedric talk to this a little bit more, because we had to come up with something to try and help our management understand where we're going.
Yeah, we built an index. It's 16 different measures that we put into an index, and we're looking at how we're growing our communication and how we're growing our network of champions. How many people are sponsoring those activities? How many of our countries are involved in this? And we're looking at adoption measure of the solutions. So how many OneDrive users, how many SharePoint users, Yammer, et cetera, and Teams starting. It's purely we took the assumption, if people use those tools, it's because it's bringing them something. We can't totally quantify it, but it's bringing them something. I wouldn't use OneDrive if it was not making it easier for me to co-edit a document or work with with a group of people. And then on top of that, we're looking at surveys, and that's where we get more of the qualitative. So and we're doing spot surveys, asking people how much this is helping you, and trying to get from them how much time do you save now per day, do you think you would say? And we ask those questions as well as we do training. So we measure also the quantity of training and the quantity, how much people are consuming the materials I'm making available to them. And how much they're consuming our training materials, how many videos they're watching, how many people have taken the e-learning, and that sort of thing. And that, plus a few other stuff, gets into our big index. And we're looking as to how our index, or we call it a productivity and adoption index, and we're looking at how it's growing. Yeah. And that is shown to our top management on a quarterly basis.
Yeah. Cool. That's really great. I'm going to ask you both a question here, and Cliff, you can start, and then Cedric. You've mentioned that you're just now in the process of launching maybe Teams and Yammer, but if I understand correctly, you had these on right away. And how have you thought about that strategy and looked at that? I mean, it's a little different. Some people really want to put it behind the funnel, and Nestlé took the approach of turning it on. How did that work? Sure.
It's a really, really good point. And I've had lots of conversations, even after my session earlier today on this, where people were kind of amazed that we did this. There was a lot of resistance on this one. So you'll recall that I mentioned this idea about core and accessory. And even there were management people that were against it. There was operations, our IT support, that were against it. We're going to get this mass storm of tickets hitting our service desks. But myself and a number of others really felt that it was important to put it out there. I mean, you're paying for an E3 subscription. Make sure you get your money back on this stuff. But it comes with an important caveat that you've got to be able to say to your user community, here's what you're supporting, and here's what we're opening up to general adoption. If you want to go and play, use, consume, go wild. But just understand that other area, that accessory set, doesn't come with the end-to-end support. And so we didn't want to just leave them stranded. We did put in place community support. We used our enterprise social networking channel as a way to support them. Myself and a number of others are quite active to help end users that come up with problems. It's even been great for us because we're getting as well immediate feedback. It's been an opportunity for us to even challenge Microsoft on a number of just feedbacks, like why doesn't the product do this, and it allowed us to even put some change in place before we actually then supported it. So it kind of improved the product before we made it a core component of our environment. So yeah, it was pretty good.
So you have these viral users that were actually okay with the viral user, and that's kind of a different aspect.
It is, and viral adoption, but in a good way.
Yeah.
I mean, I mentioned earlier about shadow IT. I mean, that was that viral about something we weren't happy about, where people were using products that weren't governed by our internal compliance. They had risk around using those services, but here, we already trusted Office 365. We'd put it through our own internal governance. We were happy to see it used, and the only problem we had was that we weren't ready to support everything. But why should our ability to not be ready to support something prevent the user from perhaps having an opportunity to improve the way they work? I think that's what it came down for me.
Yeah. And Cedric?
Yeah, and I was part of the people that didn't want to do that.
I didn't want to put you out there, man.
That's a great cue.
And
look, they're on the stage together, even though they're on the screen.
actually, coming from a background where I used to work at a market level and take care of the tickets,
Yeah.
I thought, no, this is going to be crazy. But actually, on the other side, we're trying to bring this digital mindset. And it's all about like, well, if you're at home and you have a problem with Facebook, do you call your service desk? Or you don't. Or maybe you go onto YouTube and look at video on how to do something. And we're trying to bring that in the company. And what the best way is to just say, well, these things are out there, you can explore, but there won't be any support. So already the expectations are there, and people, and this community-based support, I mean, this is growing, and that's where we're trying to go. So we're trying to go, and this was, well, looking back now, I think this was the right choice, and yeah, it enabled a lot of people. For some reason, Delve is still not one of our core solutions, but there isn't a day that I meet someone who says, oh yeah, well, I'm using Delve. This is really great. The first time was a bit scary because I thought, oh my God, people can see my documents. But then there's so much that I can get from there. And if we had waited, we would still say, no, don't use Delve. You can't use it, we deactivate it. And we enabled really a lot of people to get things done better. So really happy with that.
Now, Nestlé's constantly been doing these, pushing the envelope and, hey, the next thing out, let's go. They have their viral users. Right. What has that meant for you and your role with them from FastTrack?
Now, what's been interesting is, of course, what Cedric was talking about, the structure, how they sort of enable users to more actively use the service and get the benefit, probably wasn't in that quite shape or form as it is today. So initially, when Cedric and his team was sort of thinking about, okay, how are we going to do this? We worked with them a little bit. We had a workshop on, okay, what is the FastTrack way of driving adoption? So we talked about the dips and assets, so those enablers and prerequisites and things like that. Provided some of the content that we had available already at then, for example, the productivity library and all the templates and email content and things like that. And basically then Nestlé took the best parts of those and started to develop and enhance that sort of the practical side of implementing this thing. And I know that there is the team actively currently working on the next big release that Cedric was talking about around Teams and Yammer and things like that. So it's been great to see that some of the things that we initially introduced have found the way into the production side of Nestlé driving active use, and actually they're working. So that's been great to see.
And so now knowing, Cedric, with the service turned on, you have HR involved with this, HR divisions involved with this deployment. It's a different thing. A lot of IT teams keep HR as far as they can away. It's really cool that Nestlé brought them in. it means you're also cognizant of your end users, and you've had your viral users, and then how's that played into your champions role? What have they provided into your strategy of not overwhelming your users when you do roll out officially a feature, even though it's been on, and how's that manifest itself for the end user perspective?
Yeah, and that's back to this our communication strategy, our different channels, and it's really some people are really eager to know more and they want to use more, and you need to feed them. On the other side, there's some people you don't want to overwhelm them, and that's why we have this. We segment our user, and that's where we use our champions and using our social network to actually reach. We know the people in this group, they're really into the tech. If there's something new, there's a new feature, and that's actually one aspect we've not touched on, but it's the fact that it continuously changes. There's updates continuously, and working with you guys really is getting to know ahead of what's coming, and you want to tell them, hey, there's a new feature in OneDrive, and they get very excited, but on the other side, there's some people, like, if you tell them every week that there's something new, they'll be like, I don't want to hear from you anymore, because that's too much. Right. So it's about segmenting and having different channels to really reach them. And again, it's there's this community-driven support is really providing a lot. We always keep an eye on what is being said. So we really want the community to help each other, but sometimes you're like, oh, well, that is wrong.
Right.
So we want to intervene sometimes. So you need to keep an eye, because sometimes you could just get something that gets a bit viral, and it's all a discussion about something that is not going to happen, or something that, well, for some reason it won't work in our environment. So we keep that eye, but we really encourage the communities to drive that.
So by doing all this adoption, really putting thought behind the adoption strategies for the different things, as Nestlé's not just looking at this as a lift and shift. I mean, the email was a little bit of a lift and shift because it was seamless, but now when you're talking about OneDrive, it's more, how does this best enable, and we talk about teams, what has that meant for how you've evolved from an IT side, your business?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, once we got out of that classic workload period of Exchange and SharePoint, and we started to look forward. I mean, we've spent the best part of 8-9 months to get to the point where we're about to now flick the switch and say, right, now we're going to make all these other services core. Trying to get the messaging right, trying to smooth out some of the bumps. I mean, working with our employee digital workplace team, I mean, they're constantly testing and constantly challenging us. This is a bit, this has got too many rough edges, I don't think this is going to work. Or, you think about something like Office 365 groups, those that have actually played with it, you've got multiple entry points. The entry points are not uniform. There's no, it's not uniform entry points across all these workloads. How are we going to be able to tell this story? And so, we're kind of trying to raise the bar as well.
Right.
We're constantly saying, okay, we'll go back to the product group on that. Let's see if we can try and get that story, because you can see how powerful this product set is if we can just get it out there. And so, it's important for us to play our role as IT. We don't want to be held back just because these things are not right, but then you also feel very compassionate about, okay, we need to make it easier as well. The end user shouldn't have to deal with all these, friction points that currently exist sometimes.
Yeah. So that leads me to my question for you. Cliff, are there any new initiatives or things coming up for Nestlé from an IT perspective? I mean, Microsoft 365 rolled out.
Yep. So Office 365, you might remember from my opening, was only a component of how we saw our employee digital workplace working. Right. And it's only, and we're now starting to look beyond that. We're starting to look at what we call our modern workplace, and what that means. You sort of think about the platform. Windows for us is our primary platform, but also how you manage it. We've got such a wide workforce that no longer sit on premises. They're out on the field. Why are we constantly tying these devices back on-prem to manage them, to ensure they've got a desired state of whatever that must be? And so we've kicked off a program inside my team where we're now trying to look at that. What does it mean to take a Windows device, manage it directly out of the cloud, have it have all the services delivered from the cloud, whether it be the Office 365 bits, or whether it be provisioning the user, provisioning the device. I mean, we heard about some of those announcements made public this week around Autopilot, which is such an exciting experience, being able to buy a device directly from a vendor and have that device sent to a user wherever they are in the world. They don't have to come on premise anymore, and have that device boot and get them up and running. I mean, all of that friction that we used to have around getting a device purchased, procured, given to IT to provision, and then given to the user. I mean, you can have a lag period of weeks, sometimes even a couple of months, depending where it is in the world. So, you know, there's some of the things that we're starting to push.
Shipping it 3 or 4 times.
Oh, yeah,
right?
Exactly.
So, you know, Cedric, you've mentioned the Champion program, and I just want to, you know, give you an opportunity. Is there more you want to share about what you're doing with that program and now? And then what is the next thing? You know, we have teams coming, but what are the things, how you're looking at evolving the Champions program?
Well, we need to continue to grow the program, and that's just perpetuous. This will keep going. I mean, you need to continue to train them, to reward them and motivate them, because the Champion program is mostly voluntary. So it's not in their job description. It's so they spend 5, 10, 15% of their time working with us on this. So we continue to grow it, but what is coming for us, it's how do we start getting the company to connect much more? And how do we drive that change of work behaviors? And this is really, because eventually the tools, they're just there to support the way people work. And we're trying to change how people work. And this whole concept of working out loud, we're starting to see that in Yammer, and you know, some initiative and how people share, and then they start to connect, and then they realize. In HR is pushing for bringing the work to the talent rather than talent to work. So teams become more and more virtual, and we need to manage that. And again, the tools will support those interactions, but those ways of working needs to evolve. And that's what we're trying to bring through the Champion Network, because those people are sitting with the business. They know the business, they know the work that they're doing. And they're the one who will be able to drive these new ways. And this whole notion of being mobile, people working from wherever they are, and this is all enabled now, and it's easy enough, but you need to still get people to change and start doing it, right? Some people, for them, it's very natural, and for others, it's like, I can do that, and so we're really looking forward to bringing more of these connection in the company and how people connect. I mentioned a few times language, but that's clearly we've seen that in the past. Some people not sharing because they're not comfortable to share in a language that is not theirs. And by the time they hesitated 10 times, should I click send, and I'm not sure, then there's already 3 other answers, and they missed the point. And now getting possibility to translate stuff on the way. And I think also what we see with Stream, we're really looking forward to start digging into that one. There's I'm thinking about the availability to get the transcripts and the ability to recognize faces and jump directly. These things will be super useful for our users. We have there's a lot of conference and speeches, and you may be looking at an hour-and-a-half video to actually get those 10 minutes that you're interested in, right? And so this is again going to change the way people consume the information in the company.
Like I say, it's a behavioral change also for the end users. They're changing how they work in their styles. You have to help them evolve, and it's a real change for IT over the years. It was just here you go, here's your mailbox, here's your file share. Now Nestlé's really embraced how do we make this really part of the business.
Yeah, we developed a program which it's sort of a session where we help a team defining their working philosophy. If you want to change the way, if I'm the one in the team saying I want to change the way that we work, and I'm trying to tell the team, I will get some pushback. And some people will try to help me. Some will say, no, we don't want to hear about it. So our defining the working philosophy program is basically get the team to sit together and look at what are the issues that they have in the way that they communicate and they collaborate. They all agree on this. And the issues are always the same, mostly. right? Every team has the same problem. We work in silos, we don't know what the others are doing, and we're not sharing things, and I get to know about this file when it's finalized, and so always the same thing. I come back, but the team together acknowledged that there's a problem. Said, oh, we have a problem. They said, okay, so how do we solve it? And then they start looking, oh, we should change the way we communicate. We should be more transparent. We should share the documents more early in the creation process. Yes, okay. And then we put the tools in place to support that. And because there was this agreement in the beginning, the change is much more easier. It's still not easy, but it's much more easier. And with that agreement in the beginning, so we have this define your working philosophy program, and that's really helpful. That really helps driving that change.
Fantastic. At this time, I'd like to open this up to the audience. If you have questions for the panel, if you just want to come up to the mic so that we make sure in this odd-shaped room your question is heard. So.
Just out of curiosity, you mentioned that you use FastTrack for the mailbox migrations. Did you also use them to move your OneDrive data and your SharePoint data as well?
So no, we haven't at this stage. At the time, the FastTrack only provided Exchange migration, and because it was when we started. But we have recently re-engaged with them to look at moving what we call all of our unstructured file servers. And so that conversation's actually ongoing. I'd say to you, we'd like to go down that path. We've got a few points we're just trying to solve. We believe that what was the most powerful about FastTrack was that having that immediate tap into engineering if there was a problem, and also the monitoring. When something stops, they're immediately on the phone. Hey, something stopped. Can you check this on your side, and we'll check this on our side. I think that's a really important part of the migration, especially trying to move the amount of data we had anyway.
Like you work with an organization that's global, so we've got operations in EMEA, Asia, America. How did you deal with, and particularly since it's just been announced, more of the geolocation? Do you have multi-tenants, or do you have a single tenant that's at headquarters location? How does that work?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Right out of the gate, we struggled with this one as a company. We are head officed in Switzerland, so we made the decision that we'd just have to use the tenant that was located in Central Europe, so using the pair out of Dublin and Amsterdam. We have been talking with the product group around the multi-geo capabilities, both for Exchange as well as OneDrive. At the moment, we're sort of still debating it because whilst we think we could achieve some latency improvements around some of the tool set, the product group are kind of hesitant to kind of say, yep, we think you'd get latency improvements. So we think we'll test it and then make a decision after we've put a few users in play.
Have you found that the slowness has been a problem? Is your performance, say, in your SharePoint environment or your OneDrive environment, is it better now that you're in a Microsoft data center dealing with their networking instead of maybe another service providers, whatever they happen to put together?
Yeah, so because we already had our data already centralized to 3 regional data centers, for me sitting in Sydney connecting to, say, my mailbox in Europe, it's kind of on par with where I was for most of my work, because a lot of my work sat in the European pair of data centers. But when I had my users sitting in Australia facing what was the regional data center sitting in Sydney, they went from like 50 millisecond up to 380 millisecond. And so that response time was for them a real problem. And so we've had to look at different things to try and improve that. And the SharePoint team have done some great work. They've introduced the new Edge service, which allows it to enter into the Microsoft Fabric much closer to the end user. And so those sorts of things have actually helped us improve some of that. SharePoint, in terms of the multi-geo, they're a little bit further down the road, so we're not sure how that's going to play out because there's a real product constraint there when you think about it. You know, you've got a team site that might be accessed by everybody around the world. I mean, how do you split that up? So we're not sort of sure how that will play out. I think OneDrive and Exchange at the moment, the 2 points we'll keep an eye on and see what we decide.
Thank you.
Hi. At what point you actually decided, or when can you actually prove to the high management that you move from silos into collaboration? That's a question I'm getting right now. They ask me, okay, you want to continue this, but give me some numbers, a proof. When exactly you say that?
Back to that index, right? You're asking when you see that, how do you know that you've actually moved?
How do you know that? How do you know?
It's tough.
Yeah,
do you want to take it?
We don't know. No, So the way you want to tackle this is you want to look at examples, and you want to look at examples of people that actually have made it, some teams that have actually made it, and they will feedback to you, and we say, oh, now we operate as one team where we used to be completely isolated, or and you want to get those feedback and then do something about it. It's not really measuring, but that's kind of, you could say, well, these guys have done it, these guys have done it, and then say, well, there's others that would have done it. But the measuring how you get from silos to collaboration, that's, it's very intangible. It's just, there's so many examples. So scanning our social network really we see a lot of things out there, and because usually it's things that will be public. And when you see people starting to connect, you see a guy in Germany connecting with a guy in Budapest, and then bringing to a conversation another guy in India, and you're like, well, okay, that's the kind of use case I want to see, how people connect and do that sort of thing. But we're not scientifically measuring that.
Yeah, I think Delve Analytics can help, and there's more coming, can show how like some of those connections are happening across. So it's a good question though. It's
a very good question. I understand that you're getting it because I'm getting it too.
Very much so.
Yeah. How are you using the OneDrive? Is it basically replacing all kinds of network drives? How do you control the intellectual property? Because you may have HR-related data or other, I don't know, confidential stuff, export-restricted stuff. How do you control it? Is it just available on the OneDrive, or do you use some kind of AIP to control the access? How does it go?
Yeah, no, really good. A couple of questions there. So I'll start with your first one. So we position OneDrive as the replacement to what we used to refer to as a personal H drive, home drive, if you like, on our file servers. And so there's that one-to-one relationship, right? We're going to move this data and we're going to put it in OneDrive for you now. In terms of managing the intellectual property aspect, so we're currently piloting the Azure Information Protection, so the labeling technology as well as the encryption. We see that as a way for us to now look at tagging that data at source and then helping us when it egresses or leaves the environment. We haven't made the decision we'll definitely go ahead. We're obviously looking at the industry, but we figured, look, we're so now into the Microsoft stack, it makes sense to see, okay, how does AIP connect into these services? And I mean, I was in a session yesterday. It's going to continue to evolve and help us with conditional access, which is something else we also use to control how data leaves our service. So we sort of see the two coming together quite well for us.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think I can add to that is when we brought OneDrive, we communicated clearly the difference between OneDrive and SharePoint. So OneDrive is your own personal drive. You can share with others, but it's attached to you. The SharePoint is for your team. So we try to encourage, if this is part of a project or part of team documentation, you want to use a SharePoint. If this is your own stuff. And usually we see also a flow, like your document starts from your OneDrive, and then they probably route into a SharePoint. But what was actually very interesting is you still see today people that actually store all of the project documentation and share with everyone through their OneDrive. But what was actually very interesting is in the past, we had people creating team sites for themselves to store their own document. Yep. So it just went the complete opposite situation.
Right. Good question there.
Maybe one more question in this context. Let's say you have export restricted data that should not be in Europe. How do you manage them?
So the data sovereignty aspect is something that when it comes up, we've had to sort of look at what the legislation's actually saying, and it's not an IT thing. We've obviously got to get our lawyers into it to look at and try and interpret it. I mean, we've got examples that have been in Russia, Germany, China, Brazil. They've all come with their story. And so far, when you get down to the finer print, the interpretation, I'm just saying this, the interpretation from the lawyers looking at this data for us, we've still been able to satisfy our data remaining where it is. Now, we're not a government situation, so I know, take China for example. If you are a public service type business, you're not supposed to allow your data to leave China. We're not in that situation, but of course, the world constantly is being challenged on this particular aspect, and I suspect that the multi-geo service we mentioned earlier may be a way for us to look at how we get that data back into the sovereign country involved to maybe solve that for us if it comes up. But it's a very fluid thing.
It's a very fair question. So I actually run the FastTrack migration team worldwide. I didn't really share that part when I was introducing myself. I'm just part of FastTrack. But when we launched the file share migrations, this is a constant conversation we're having with customers, especially because, I mean, F drive was just file shares, S drive was shared, P was personal, right? But people were doing their own things. What they were really we were leaving them sometimes for these end users as as companies. You were trusting your end users, and now when you are now bringing the adventure of moving this to the cloud, you're forced to you have to analyze it now. Just had somebody in the booth before I came down here. We were discussing how the options on that, and there's no one solid answer for every company. And I think what Cliff alluded to was it depends on also your market. A pharmaceutical company is going to have a totally different strategy. Even with the data where it can even sit. Sometimes they only want the data coming to US because that changes laws, like the drugs that they're maybe developing, or if you work actually with government agencies. And so I think it's from the conversations we've had with customers is really looking at what their case scenario is and then what possible options are to have on some pieces. And there might be some cases where we say, you know what, that shouldn't sit in a OneDrive at all, or even a team site. Maybe it's an Azure blob where it should sit that set of data. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I have a question for Cedric. Can you tell us a little bit more about the training you guys put in place to enhance adoption, especially in this multi-language environment that you guys have in Nestlé? And if you can tell us the role of the champions in the training, please.
Well, thank you for the question. It's our champions. We ask them to train people, but they will not run a 1 hour a 1 day session on SharePoint or 4 hour session on OneDrive. They will be more training on little things, right? So, but what's important is that they get themselves trained so that they get the right message and they get the right knowledge. And we continuously do that with them. So the way we organize actually was the champion network. So because we're such a broad organization, so we develop everything centrally, all the things that the champions will need, the content that we'll use to, for instance, go into a weekly meeting and say, this is what Teams is. And like a one-pager. So we develop everything centrally. We get everything translated, all right? And obviously we reuse a lot of the Microsoft content, and we reuse all the content that actually they're translated. Also, our strategy is, well, if Microsoft can provide the e-learning in the language, we take it. If it does not exist, then we revert back to English. Unfortunately, we can't do everything. Also, we don't translate in all of the languages. We try to make sure we can target or we can reach 80% of our population. So we do in 12 languages we reach most of them. And the champions, we expect them to, as I mentioned, it's voluntary. So they usually spend little time. What's interesting is, in many cases, those champions exist already, or they existed already like 6 months ago before we start pulling them into our network. And they were doing that. They were educating people because that's what they like to do. And they're interested in technology. They're interested in productivity. So we bring them into our network and we start to train them. We make them more efficient, right? So either they spend less time doing it because they'll be more efficient, or they just spend as much time, but then they do more. That's our strategy.
We have time for one more question, because I want to give people time to get to another session, because I know it's a long distance travel from most locations. Yeah.
Who provides the support? Is it Microsoft, or do you have internal support for your customers?
In terms of just the IT aspect, or?
Yeah, if they have like a help desk, do you have a help desk, internal help desk, or is it straight to Microsoft because you don't own the product?
Yeah, so we do internal help desk with sort of a partner with offshore, but it's not Microsoft.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank Cedric, Cliff, and Juha for coming on, and I'd like to thank the audience for the questions and the time. Please enjoy the rest of Ignite, and if you could fill out your evals, that'd be wonderful. Thank you.